if you've been following global affairs, even just casually over the last 10 years or so, you've probably felt it. A shift. Something feels different, maybe a bit more uneasy. We've really seen the international security landscape change dramatically since, say, 2013, almost beyond recognition in some ways. I mean, think about China. They started getting much more aggressive with these salami slicing tactics, little moves adding up over time in the East and South China Seas. That really kicked off around November 2013. And then, boom, March 2014, Russia just grabs Crimea. And they haven't stopped meddling in eastern Ukraine since. These aren't just random things happening. They signal a big change. And what's really unsettling is how adversaries are operating now. It's not just tanks and troops anymore, is it? They're using hybrid warfare, gray zone tactics. They blend conventional military stuff with cyber attacks, loads of propaganda, economic arm twisting. Remember that Sony Pictures hack back in 2014? That wasn't a bomb, it was digital. North Korea apparently behind it, hitting U.S. interests directly, wrecking IT systems, threats against theaters. It just blurs all the lines. And it really challenges our traditional military advantages, puts huge strain on federal cybersecurity. Get this, federal agencies saw reported cyber incidents jump 1,121% between 2006 and 2014.
1,100%. Wow.
Yeah. A staggering number. It shows this isn't just a trend. It's a whole new way conflict happens. So forget everything you thought you knew about global conflict. Today, we're navigating a treacherous new landscape where the battle lines are blurred and the threats are invisible. Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today is to try and unpack these really complex, evolving threats. We want to look at this shifting global landscape and ask, what does the United States need to do? How do we respond effectively, uphold our values, protect our interests in this challenging new era? We'll be digging into insights from places like the Heritage Foundation and various Congressional Research Service reports to help us get a clear picture from them.
Okay, so let's get into this. This idea that the world order is shifting dramatically, moving away from that, what is it called, the unipolar moment?
That's right, the period after the Cold War where the U.S. was really the dominant power.
It feels like we're in totally new territory now.
You've hit the nail on the head. What we're seeing is exactly what Chuck Hagel, when he was outgoing Secretary of Defense back in 2014, called a new world order, or maybe a new strategic situation. He talked about renewed great power competition. Basically, the world isn't just facing new problems, it's fundamentally restructuring. There's a new struggle for influence. It's a reality we haven't really faced head-on since the Cold War, maybe.
So the rules are changing fast.
Exactly. And it's challenging that whole U.S.-led international order that's been more or less in place since World War II. That post-Cold War comfort zone. It's definitely over.
And we can really point to specific actors driving this, can't we? China, with those actions in the East and South China Seas starting late 2013, and Russia, the illegal seizure of Crimea in March 2014, the ongoing stuff in eastern Ukraine. These aren't subtle hints.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Those specific actions by China and Russia are probably the clearest signs, and they really demand we think differently about conflict. What makes them so insidious, so tricky, is how they're often done using hybrid warfare and gray zone threats.
Okay, let's define those a bit. They sound like buzzwords, but they mean something specific.
They do. They're not just academic terms. They describe these new kinds of aggressive military and paramilitary operations that deliberately, blur the lines, make it hard to see where conflict begins and ends. Russian military thinkers, for instance, they openly talk about using a combination of political, economic information, technological, and ecological campaigns.
Ecological too, wow.
All designed to neutralize adversary actions without resorting to weapons in the traditional sense. The key insight, really, is that these powers want to achieve their goals without crossing that clear line into conventional war.
Which makes it incredibly hard for other nations to figure out how to respond.
Precisely. It's a huge challenge for formulating a clear traditional response.
And Russia's playbook here, it's really something else. It's not just about the military anymore. It feels much more, sophisticated, multi-layered.
That's a very good way to put it. Russia's hybrid tactics, especially what we saw in Ukraine, but also elsewhere, are really a masterclass in this approach. They do things like training separatist groups, using massive propaganda campaigns to sow confusion and shape opinions.
The information warfare aspect.
Huge aspect. Then there's leveraging diplomatic pressure, economic measures, using oil and gas exports as a weapon against former Soviet states or countries in Central Europe.
Right, turning off the tap.
Exactly. They also back separatists to provoke responses, maybe overreactions, from local governments, which then gives Russia a pretext to intervene further. And we've seen cyber attacks, of course. against private companies, government websites, even in NATO countries.
And psychological operations.
Definitely. Targeting Russian-speaking populations to build loyalty to Moscow. It's incredibly broad, attacking on all these fronts simultaneously, all designed to weaken and divide without triggering a full-scale military response. It's a comprehensive, often sneaky, strategy for gaining advantage.
So, given this whole new playbook, it makes you wonder how the U.S. reacted, especially early on. Going back to the beginning of Putin's leadership, did we maybe miss some early signs or not take them seriously enough?
Well, looking back, it certainly seems that way. There were early concerns about Putin, absolutely, even while some Western leaders maybe saw him as a potential reformer or, he speaks fluent German. He is pretty good at speaking Western.
The surface appearance.
Right. But his actions, even early on, often had that look and smell of KGB tactics, as some put it. There was that case of Igor Sutyagin, a researcher. The FSB, that's Russia's security service, arrested him back in 1999, charged him with treason for working on civil-military relations, a project partly funded by Canadian universities, believe it or not.
Treason for academic work.
Yes. And it showed an early willingness to use the state security apparatus to crush independent thought, especially connections to the West. That should have been a huge red flag about where things were headed.
That is chilling. And it wasn't just individuals, was it? Seems like Western leaders, maybe particularly during the Clinton administration, were hesitant to really call out what was happening politically in Russia. You heard things like Russian elections being called free and fair, even when there were obvious signs of manipulation. Or pointing to the number of NGOs as proof of democracy, while ignoring the fact that those groups were often harassed. Why do you think that was? Wishful thinking?
It could have been wishful thinking, a desire for stability, perhaps. But that kind of rhetoric, well, it came at a price. It tended to undermine the very efforts at globalization that Western governments said they wanted to support, because it didn't hold Russia to those standards. And there were specific U.S. policy failures, too, that really damaged credibility.
Like what?
Well, there was evidence about IMF funds, for example, International Monetary Fund money going into Russia. The report suggested that out of every $10 of the American money, all but $2 was being siphoned off by someone else. It wasn't helping the Russian people like it was supposed to.
So massive corruption.
Right. And the insight there is it wasn't just wasted money. From the Russian perspective, it damaged America's credibility, made U.S. efforts look naive or maybe even complicit.
Okay, what else?
There was also missile defense policy. It got pretty inconsistent. Apparently, the U.S. got sucked in on an agreement by the Russians about a specific missile system demarcation. It let Russia market the anti-2500, which we now know as the S-400 system, a system that later violated the very agreement the U.S. had signed on to.
So we basically enabled them to build something that worked against our own interests.
It demonstrated a lack of foresight, maybe a willingness to be played. It fundamentally weakened our own strategic position down the line. The lesson seems clear. Turning a blind eye or rationalizing these kinds of actions has real long-term negative consequences.
It really raises a fundamental question, doesn't it? If we don't speak plainly, if we don't have that candor and call things as they are, how can we expect adversaries like Russia to respect us? Seems like basic stuff for diplomacy, for deterrence, but maybe we lost sight of it.
It's absolutely fundamental. Looking ahead, any administration really has to strive for greater consistency. That's key. It means not just saying the right things, but matching words with money, properly funding democracy assistance programs, if that's what we say we support, and being willing to speak the truth about how institutions in other countries are actually operating, even when it's awkward.
Even if it complicates things short term.
Exactly. Clearly communicate what the U.S. values. Make sure policy actually backs up the rhetoric. If we don't, we risk looking weak or hypocritical. And that just emboldens rivals. Real strength comes from integrity, from sticking to your values, not from pretending adversaries are something they're not.
Which brings us back to these invisible battlegrounds, the cyber realm. It's fascinating how adversaries are using tools way beyond traditional military hardware. Cybersecurity is absolutely a frontline issue now.
Oh, completely. And those statistics you mentioned earlier about threats to federal systems, they are just startling. They really hammer home the urgency. Let's repeat that. Fiscal year 2006 to 2014, reported cyber incidents hitting federal agencies jumped from about 5,500 to over 67,000.
That 1,121% increase. Just staggering.
It really is. And look at what types of incidents were most reported. Non-cyber, things like human error. Losing equipment that was 25%. Still significant. But then you have scans probes attempted access at 19%, constant reconnaissance, policy violations at 17%, insider issues or negligence, equipment problems at 13%, and actual malicious code viruses, malware at 11%.
So it's not just external hackers, it's a whole mix of vulnerabilities.
Exactly. It's a multi-front digital assault,
Yeah.
external threats, insider threats, simple mistakes, constant probing for weaknesses.
And we've seen some really concrete, pretty scary examples of state actors using these cyber weapons, right? Things with real-world impacts.
Absolutely. Think back to Estonia in 2007, Georgia in 2008. Pro-Russian hackers launched these massive DDoS attacks.
Yeah.
Distributed denial of service timed perfectly with military movements on the ground. Crippled communications, government websites, real synergy there.
Wow, coordinated like that.
Then there was Stuxnet, that incredibly sophisticated computer worm. It didn't just steal data, it physically damaged centrifuges in Iran's nuclear facilities. That showed code could literally break critical infrastructure. A huge leap.
And Sony Pictures in 2014, attributed to North Korea.
Right. Disabled their IT systems, actually destroyed data, leaked embarrassing internal emails, led to threats against movie theaters. Huge disruption for a major company. These aren't hypotheticals, they're real acts of aggression.
It feels like a new form of warfare.
It aligns perfectly with this idea of political warfare. George Kennan, the strategist from the mid-20th century, defined it broadly back then. He called it the employment of all the means at a nation's command, short of war, to achieve its national objectives.
Using everything but outright war.
Pretty much. And today, in the 21st century, that definition definitely includes these shadow conflicts, fights waged by masked warriors, often without clear state attribution. Kennan probably couldn't have imagined wars of silicon, using high-tech tools to unbalance and unhinge states, hitting their civil and military capabilities.
Undermining from within, almost.
That's the goal. Win without firing a conventional shot. Erode stability, erode confidence.
So how is the U.S. actually responding? What are the big challenges still? We know the Department of Defense, the DoD, has a hefty cybersecurity budget, around $5.1 billion back in FY 2015. And there were plans to really grow the U.S. Cyber Command's forces, the cyber mission forces, up to maybe 6,200 people by the end of FY 2016.
Right. Investments are being made. Personnel are being trained.
But it still seems incredibly hard to pin down who's behind these attacks, right? Attribution is a nightmare.
It's a massive hurdle. If you can't definitively prove who did it, how do you retaliate effectively or proportionally?
And the whole legal side is fuzzy, too. How does the traditional law of armed conflict even apply in cyberspace?
That's still evolving. Very unclear in many situations. It creates this legal gray zone that attackers can exploit.
And there's another vulnerability you mentioned earlier, our reliance on Russian parts, like rocket engines.
Yeah, that's a particularly glaring one. The RD-180 rocket engine, made in Russia, used in U.S. rockets that launch critical military satellites.
That seems strategically unwise, doesn't it?
Creates a serious dependency in a really critical area. A vulnerability we can't afford, especially given the current climate. It's something that needs urgent attention.
So the challenge isn't just about money or manpower.
No, those are vital, but it's deeper. It's about developing the right doctrines, the legal frameworks, the intelligence capabilities to actually operate effectively in this gray zone. Because attribution is hard, states can launch damaging cyber attacks and just deny it, avoiding traditional consequences. The legal ambiguity adds another layer of difficulty for response. The core insight here is that our adversaries have found the seams, the gaps in our traditional security thinking, and they're exploiting them. It requires a fundamental rethink.
So we've covered a lot today, a global security landscape that's changed dramatically. Assertive state actors, these complex, multi-domain threats, hybrid warfare, cyber attacks. It seems clear the U.S. needs to adapt its foreign policy, its defense strategy, fundamentally, and probably faster than we have been.
Absolutely. A whole-of-government approach isn't just a nice idea, it's essential now. And it has to be built on consistent policy, clear communication about our values and intentions, and a defense posture that's strong but also adaptable. Adaptable enough to handle conventional threats and these sophisticated hybrid tactics. It really means understanding that power today isn't just military might. It's political, economic, informational too. We have to compete effectively on all those fronts. We need to stop hoping adversaries will play by rules they clearly disregard and instead adapt to the game they're actually playing.
It leaves us with a pretty serious thought, doesn't it? As we face this world where conflict lines blur, where attacks can come from unseen fronts. How prepared are we? Not just our government, but us as a society. How prepared are we to defend not just borders, but our way of life against an enemy who might be trying to win without ever firing a shot in a traditional war? Something to think about.